Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap-up. May was not a good reading month for me. I finished almost no books until the very end, but I did get a lot of audiobooks in, and I'm going to tell you how many books I read this month, and your immediate reaction is going to be like, Kyle, that was a lot of books. And you would be right, it is a lot of books, but it's a lie. It's a dirty, rotten lie, because most of them are audiobooks, and most of the physical reading I did the very end of the month, like the last couple days. Like I finished 3 books right on the last day of May, which is why these are kind of always going to be a little bit later in the month, just because I always read right up until the deadline of the month. I kind of use that as motivation to finish a couple books, and so I never want to record this when I'm still about to finish a book at the end of the month, so that's why I do it that way. That being said, in May I read 23 books, 2 of which were novellas, and 1 was a kid's book, which is, I mean, it's a novella, but it's a kid's book, so it's not called a novella. But most of those were audiobooks, as I said, but I did get some really good books in this month. I'm really happy with the quality of stuff that I read, even if for whatever reason my eyes just didn't want to do any physical reading this month. So without further ado, I'm going to start at the bottom and then work my way up to the books that I really liked, ending with my book of the month. So the book that I read that I did not like at all this month is unfortunately a self-published book, and I really don't like harping on self-published books when I don't like them, just because I just feel like the visibility of them is so much lower, and so like negative reviews carry more weight. But I have to be honest with what I've read and how I feel about it. So that first book is On Stranger Tides by Travis Riddle. Now, I really was drawn in by the cover of this book, and I heard a couple positive reviews of it, and it's essentially, fantasy Pokemon. It's like progression fantasy, but heavily inspired by Pokemon. And I've seen a couple people who really love Pokemon that just absolutely loved it, and so I thought for sure that I would really like it. And unfortunately, that was my problem, is that it just really felt like Pokemon. Like it felt so much like Pokemon. Like it's just like it's like, that meme where it's like, oh, can I copy your homework? And it's like, okay, but just change a little bit so we don't get in trouble. Like that's what it felt like. It was so similar to Pokemon. And beyond that, I just felt like the writing was really stilted. Like I thought the dialogue was really weak. And I just thought that it had tons of info dumping. Like it would just like tell you about like Pokemon. Like imagine if you, instead of watching Pokemon, you were reading a book about Pokemon, but then, a guy would just stop and be like, well, Primate does all of this stuff, and then, but Lapras does all of this stuff, and then Pikachu does all of this stuff. And then you'd just be like, wow, this is the least interesting way to get this information. And I ended up not liking it at all. I thought some passages were like laughably bad, and I feel bad saying that, but it was just like, there was one passage that was like, he could have avoided it if he moved to the left, but he didn't move to the left, so he didn't. And I was like, what? I gave On Lavender Tides a 4 out of 10, and I'm really sorry to say it did not work out for me. The next book I had this month that I didn't really vibe with much was The Witness for the Dead by Catherine Addison. This is a standalone spin-off of The Goblin Emperor, which I have right here, so I'm just going to hold this up because I don't have the copy for The Witness of the Dead, but I will put it up somewhere. I didn't really like Witness for the Dead because it is primarily a murder mystery. I thought that's fun in a fantasy world to have a mystery, and the character that we're following is a minor character in The Goblin Emperor who is now called somewhere else to investigate a murder, and there's some other stuff going on there. And I just had a couple problems with this book. The first thing is that I just don't feel like Kalahar, something like that, is a character that was interesting enough to follow. Like it's kind of like the Book of Boba Fett problem, where it's like he's interesting as like a minor character, but then to give him his own story, I just don't think the story was there. But my second problem is that the names in this series are just very hard, and in Goblin Emperor it was a little bit easier for me because you could kind of get a sense of who they were by their role in the story, even if you couldn't remember their names. But this was essentially Kalahar going around talking to a bunch of different people trying to solve this mystery, and all of the names are just super weird, and I've never, on audio, it just wasn't working for me. I could not tell you the name of a single character in this book besides the main character. That's my own thing, but if I had read it physically, I would have had the same problem too. And then the second thing is just that the mystery wasn't that compelling. Like, I never felt like I was really invested in the mystery. But if you kind of just want like a cozy mystery set in a fantasy world, or if you really like the Goblin Emperor and want more of the world, I could see really liking this. I think it was well received. It just wasn't really what I was looking for or expecting. Anyway, I gave Witness for the Dead 5.5 out of 10. As far as I'm concerned about connections to the Goblin Emperor, I think you could just start with this if you just want to jump into a short book that If this is more interesting to you, you don't want to deal with kind of the political side of the Goblin Emperor, because the Goblin Emperor is, like, this is a very political book. It's a little bit longer. It's like 500 pages. The Witness of the Dead is like 250 pages. It's just like a straight mystery book, essentially. So you don't have to read the Goblin Emperor to start with that one. Alright, the next two books I'm going to talk about together, and I also kind of just found them average. The first is 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker, and then the sequel, How to Rule an Empire and Get Away with It. I've been reading 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City since February, and I've just been dipping in like a couple pages at a time. It was not going very fast. It was only a 300-page book, and it took me 3 months to read. So I ended up giving it a 6.5 out of 10, which is as high as I could possibly give something that took me that long and was just such a struggle for me to pick up. But there were aspects that I really liked of it. Like, it's weird in the sense that I didn't say that I really enjoyed the experience, but it did make me want to read more K.J. Parker. I thought the narrative voice that he was telling the story through was so distinct, and I really liked a lot of the humor. Like, when I finished the book, I had a bunch of quotes, and I thought that, okay, there was a lot of lines that really resonated with me, or like really made me laugh or think or whatever. And the ending, like 20%, I thought was really good. I read that all in one chunk, but until we got to that last 20%, I just did not care about this. I think it was something about like the world building was just so shoddy, and it was like intentionally kept from us, but because nothing else was really happening that was interesting, it just felt like you had this guy's humor, and that was really it, and it just wasn't enough for me until the end. So I then read the second book, and the second book I listened to on audio instead of read physically, and I thought that would be easier because it's a first-person narration, and I really didn't care much for the second book. I honestly couldn't even tell you that much about it anymore at this point. I gave How to Rule an Empire a 5.5 out of 10, and I would stop with the trilogy at this point, except that I got an arc of the third book, and I want to read that. I mean, I got that arc in like September of last year because the third book came out in January, and I was like, well, I'll just binge the whole trilogy, and then I just never did. So I'm going to finish the trilogy. My problem with the second book, How to Rule an Empire, is just that it felt so similar to the first book. Like, you're following a different character, and it's still first-person narration. But I felt like the character was just so similar, they just had a different upbringing. So instead of, like, the first character is like an engineer, and then the second character is an actor. And so, other than that, and things related to their profession, I just felt like they were the exact same character. And the way that the story unraveled in the second book, I didn't find as interesting as how it unraveled in 16 Ways. And so, overall, it was just an extremely average experience. I'm not going to stop with KJ Parker. Like, Alan talks up KJ Parker all the time. I'm definitely going to continue with some of his other stuff, but I don't think the Siege trilogy is going to be for me, although maybe the third book will change my mind. Alright, next we have a nonfiction memoir that I listened to in all one sitting, I think, or like one day. It was really short, and that's Hello Molly by Molly Shannon. This just came out. It was on my Libby app, and I just wanted like a short audiobook that is kind of easy to listen to while I did like chores and errands and stuff. And I really liked it. It was funny. Like, I really liked Molly Shannon. I liked all the stuff with SNL and how she, really like honed her craft. And I also didn't know that she had like a horrific tragedy that happened in her childhood that like really restructured her whole life. I had no idea about that. And so this was really good. It falls into the problem that most memoirs have, which is that I just don't think it had enough substance. I really like memoirs. I read a lot of them for several reasons. One, I think they're very easy to read, especially to listen to if they're narrated by the author. And then also, I feel like the more that you listen to memoirs, you get different ideas of how other people think, of how different lives are lived, especially people whose lives you would never see, or if you have interest in a certain area of the world. Like, I really like, like Hollywood and musicians and stuff like that. You get a really good insight into how those people perceive those institutions or those areas. And so, over the course of time, reading a lot of memoirs, I feel like you gain a lot of passive knowledge about the world and about how people work. But individual memoirs can be really hit or miss, and a lot of them don't delve in deeply enough as I would like. And so that's kind of what this one was. Like, she had this really horrible tragedy, and then she didn't really talk about it that much in the book, which, that's fair, it's her book, but it was just kept pretty lighthearted the whole time. So I gave this a 6 out of 10. I would recommend it if you like Molly Shannon, but otherwise, like, I don't think it brought anything new. Next, I have The Secret Life of Groceries by Benjamin Lohr, I believe his name is. The first half of this book, I was pretty sure I was going to give it a 5-star, and then it just kept getting worse and worse. I really didn't like the author of this book, and I don't mean that as like as a person. I don't know anything about him, but the narrative voice he chose to employ for this book, I just did not like at all. He kept giving you tidbits of information, and then like you could tell, or he would say right in the book that he was following a person like to get more of the story from their side, and then he would just spend pages and pages of time talking about how wonderful that human being is. But at least we're not really here for that. Like, for example, there's a whole portion about how the trucking industry operates and how truckers are taken advantage of, and I think that's really fascinating, and it's something that we should definitely know more about, because of the stuff that I learned about the trucking industry in this book is like pretty horrifying. But then he would also spend like 15 pages, I felt like, just talking about how great this particular trucker was, and how she just like, just the creme de la creme, cream of the crop. She just never complains. She's just like an absolute stellar person. And that's wonderful. But that's not why I'm reading the book. Like, do a couple sentences maybe, and then just move on. And he just kept doing stuff like that. And then also he kept like pointing out very particular types of groceries whenever he mentioned something, and it always had an air of like, if only people weren't so specific in the things they bought, we just wouldn't have problems. Like, it just came out very holier than thou and arrogant, and I just was just so annoyed by this author by the end of it. It would be like, well, when the chocolate covered almonds and the pistachio flavored cod, or whatever, whatever the thing was, he would just get really specific, and I was just but there was a lot of good information in this. I gave this a 6 out of 10 as well. If you're interested in kind of like the behind the scenes story of how groceries get to the grocery store, there was a lot of good information here. But unfortunately, I just don't think it really coalesced with this author. Next we have Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. This was the one that I was talking about that's a kid's book. I mostly read this because a couple of people that I expect have read this recently or throughout their lives and have said really good things about it, and how it's not really like the Disney movie. So the narrator is Jim Dale for the audiobook, and I thought Jim Dale was great for the Harry Potter book, so I was like, absolutely. And I really liked Jim Dale's narration. I really liked the kind of like storybook vibe that the book gave us, and the narrative voice I thought was really strong. It was a very interesting book exploring how these kids don't want to grow up. The character of Peter Pan was way more interesting in this version, but ultimately I just kind of thought it was a fine read. Like, I'm glad that I read it, but it's not going to sit with me very long. Like, especially because I've seen the Disney movie so much, it's just that's always going to be kind of the thing I think about when I think of Peter Pan. Also, I mean, this book's just like racist. Like, I mean, I know it was of its time, but man, just like hearing a book talk about the Redskins just like all the time, I was just like, can we stop? But like, obviously, I don't really hold that against the book that much, but it is there. It is something you should be aware of. The Disney classic definitely depicted that aspect of it well to the book. So I gave this a 6.5 out of 10. Glad I read it. Probably won't read it again, but I do recommend that you read it if you are curious about it. Next, I read another kids book. I guess I was just in the mood for kids books this month, and it is The Legends of Luke Skywalker by Ken Liu. The only reason I read this book is that it was by Ken Liu, and it is the only piece of fiction by him that I have not read. And so I was like, okay, just to be a completionist, I'm going to read this book. And it's kind of like a Canterbury Tales story where there's a bunch of people on a ship, and they're headed somewhere, and they're all telling stories about Luke Skywalker. And so because of that, the stories about Luke Skywalker are very different. Like, they're exaggerated, they're wild, some of them are obviously not true. And because of that, they have varying qualities. Now, I really enjoyed what this book is trying to do. I actually think the low rating on it is a little bit weird. I think that's a lot of adults reading it and thinking like, oh, this isn't what I would want, like, or this didn't happen, or whatever, and then they give it a low rating. But it is such a Ken Liu book, and I think that's why, like, Ken Liu writing Star Wars is just still a Ken Liu book. And I thought it was so fascinating. Like, there's the very first story in this book is hilarious. I absolutely recommend anybody who is interested in Star Wars at all to read this first story in this book, which is that there's a conspiracy theorist who thinks the entire first trilogy is actually a conspiracy theory, and that the rebellion had, like, just used a bunch of propaganda and all that stuff, and that Luke Skywalker was actually, like, this, like, criminal, like, con man dude, and Obi-Wan Kenobi was his mentor in how to be a con man, and they all just kind of bumbled and fumbled their way into being mascots of the rebellion, and I just thought it was absolutely hilarious. This is just kind of a fun, quick read. I recommend it. I had a good time with it. If you go in with the right expectations, I think it's a fun Star Wars book. I gave it a 7 out of 10, and now I can say that I've read every Ken Liu book. Next, you have a novella that is about to be released. I had an e-arc of it on audio, and that is A Mirror Mended by Alex Harrow. I actually didn't know this was a sequel to a different novella. I thought it was a standalone novella. That could have cause potential issues. I'm sure I would have enjoyed it more had I listened to it after listening to the first one, but I still did like it. I thought it was interesting and refreshing. It was very fun and quirky. The narrative voice of the main character I thought was really fun. The premise is basically that there is a multiversal universe, and this girl can enter these universes, and they're all like fairy tale worlds, and so she goes into a lot of them, and she helps fairy princesses find their happy endings, and then she gets pulled into one where she actually has to help the villain. And so the whole story is kind of about like how agency works, and how like you're not a slave to the way that the story has always been told, and you can kind of rise above that and change the story to what you want to do, and that you have agency, and you can create your own happy ending. And I just thought it was fun. Like, it was a good novella. I recommend it if you're looking for like a light read, or if you like fairy tales or something. I probably wouldn't have picked it up physically, but I wanted to get my net galley ratio up, and it was short, so that was why I picked it up. But I'm glad I picked it up. It was fun. I gave it a 7 out of 10. Next, we have another audiobook, E-Arc, that is coming out on June 14th, I believe, or maybe June 21st, and that is I'd Like to Play Alone, Please, by Tom Segura. Tom Segura is one of my favorite comedians. I find him absolutely hilarious. I've listened to him on so many podcasts. I've watched all of his stand-up specials multiple times, and I was really excited he was releasing a book, especially on audio. I was really happy to get a copy from NetGalley and just be able to listen to it, and it was really fun. It was funny. Unfortunately, comedians do this thing that I don't like, where they put their stand-up bits into a book in written form, and I just don't understand the appeal of that. I don't understand why people think that is a good idea. Maybe it's just for the idea of legacy, where they're like, oh, I want my bits to be in a physical book, and that's why they put them in, but I don't get it. People reading the book are going to have already watched your stand-up, most likely, so it doesn't make sense to me. But not all of the stories were from his previous stand-up, and it did make me laugh a fair bit. It is extremely light. You're not going to get any depth from this book whatsoever. It is just to make you laugh, and I think it did that. If you like Tom Segura, you will like this book. If you have never heard of Tom Segura, I don't recommend starting here. I gave this book a 7 out of 10. Next, we have a reread that I did this month on audio, just to kind of refresh myself on the book. I didn't have the most positive view on it the first time, and that is the Gunslinger by Stephen King. Now, with this book, I read it physically the first time, and without any other context from The Dark Tower, I did not really like it that much. I think I gave it 3 stars, and apart from the last, 25 pages, I just thought it was really boring. It was really dry. And, it just, not really much happens in it. I mean, I guess some stuff does, and just like the way it's written is just almost designed to make me bored. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm sorry. I know, some people really like this book. I think it's Sarah's favorite of the Dark Tower books, but I just didn't really like it the first time, and it was available on my Libby app. I was like, you know what, maybe I'll give it another try on audio, and I did appreciate it more the second time through. Now that I have more context for the Dark Tower, I did enjoy it more this time. I still have a lot of the same complaints. It is just a really dry, slow kind of book, but the ending was just so powerful, and I really liked the ending even more the second time. And, if you're watching this and you've never tried the Dark Tower series, I cannot recommend enough that you give it till book 2. The first book is not representative. I know everybody says that, but it's just a weird book. And then the Dark Tower gets a lot better. And now that I've kind of refreshed myself, I hope to get back into the Dark Tower and read Wolves of the Calla soon, which is the next one that I have up. I gave my Gunslinger reread a 7 out of 10. The next thing I did was finish my reread of Skeleton Crew. I technically only read like a third of this book this month. I have been reading it slowly along with Jake the Bookish Drummer's Discord, and I just got so close to the end, and I was like, I'm just going to finish this so I have one less thing to read. Previous to my reread, I would have held this up as my favorite collection of short stories, along with Ken Liu's Paper Menagerie and other stories, and on reread, I don't think that at all. I'm kind of bummed that I reread it, but at least now I know that I've updated my feelings on it, but essentially, this book has 3 amazing short stories in it, and that is The Jaunt, The Raft, and Survivor Type, all of which I loved on reread. I will continue to reread those 3 stories. I think they're excellent pieces of short fiction. Highly recommend just checking those out. And it's not that everything else in this book is bad. It's that a lot of it is average, and my brain just forgot about it in the last 14 years because I just remembered the high highs. And a couple of the other stories, like Grandma and Uncle Otto's Truck, were good, but nothing super memorable, and it's just funny that I just love those 3 stories so much that I was just like, this is my favorite collection of all time. So my reread rating definitely went down. I gave this a 7.5 out of 10. If you really like King, I recommend it, but otherwise I just recommend those 3 stories. Just dip in, read those in a bookstore or something. They're short, and then dip out. Next we have An Ugly Truth, Inside Facebook's Battle for Dominion by Shira Frankel, I believe. I don't have that much to say about this one, honestly. I only listened to it because I just feel like it's been kind of like everywhere and I wanted an opinion on it. And I mostly knew all of this stuff, like maybe not the actual particulars, but I knew most of it. Facebook does some things that I don't agree with. It's not a book that paints Facebook in a good light. It doesn't paint Mark Zuckerberg in a good light. It doesn't paint Sheryl Sandberg in a good light. But I kind of already knew that. I would say if you're new to the whole Facebook drama about what's going on with them, it's a good place to start. But I don't think it's gonna like totally change your mind on what Facebook's been doing. I gave this 7.5 out of 10 though because it was well written. I can't hold it against the book that I already knew a lot of the information, but yeah, there it is. Next I had The Insect Crisis by Oliver Millman. I got this as an e-arc from NetGalley. I listened to it on audio. I really liked this. I wish it was a little bit longer, and I think it would have been much better for me. But it's about how insects are going away and how this is going to have a devastating effect on all of our lives. And it is not a fun book at all, because it's just, you're going to get stressed out about something that you can't really fix. You can't help. It's just happening. And we're going to have to live with the consequences unless we have some widespread change. But I do think it's important to bring awareness to these types of issues, and hopefully, more people find out about what's going on with any sort of issue like this that has a bad effect on our planet, that we can then, get some momentum going and make some changes. So there was a lot of really good information in this one. Even just like it really made me think back to my childhood. There's a whole chapter on how, lightning bugs are more sparse now. And I was like, yeah, when I was a kid, I used to see lightning bugs all the time. Or the fact that a scientist drove the same length of road every day for 20 years and measured the amount of bugs that hit his windshield. And it's at like 1% that it was 20 years ago. Like we've just lost so many insects. And then I was thinking about it. I was like, yeah, when I was younger, you always had to stop and wipe your windshield. So yeah, I think this was a really informative book, especially if somebody like me who didn't know anything really about the problem besides knowing that there was a problem. And I gave The Insect Crisis an 8 out of 10. Next we have The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I really liked this book. I thought it had like nice fairy tale vibes, and Vasnya, the main character, I thought was a really strong main protagonist. I really liked her. I also really liked the kind of folklore nature of the story and how it's actually based on like Russian mythology or folk tales, stuff like that. And it's historical fantasy in the sense that it's set in Russia during, I believe, the like 12th century or 13th century, and I just like that aspect of it. I honestly had no qualms with this book at all. It just didn't reach the kind of high heights of a book that like I absolutely love, but I'm going to continue this trilogy pretty soon probably. I really enjoyed it, and I gave The Bear and the Nightingale an 8 out of 10. Next, we have another audiobook e-arc that I got from NetGalley, and that is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah, I believe is how you say her name. And I really liked this book. This is one of the best debut novels I've read in a little bit. The Stardust Thief is set in a world where jinns are hunted and killed because when they die, their blood kind of makes the land grow. And so, like, the more jinns that have died in an area, the more, like, lush and green it is, and the more vibrancy the world has. And so there are these jinn hunters, and when jinns die, they also leave behind these like artifacts that are magic. And so you have Luli, who is an artifact hunter, and she goes and she finds these artifacts and she gives them to people high prices. She's like well known for this, and she has a secret jinn bodyguard, and he is what helps her find all these artifacts. But it's a secret that he's a jinn because people can't know that. And then she gets roped into this journey to find this really powerful artifact, and she goes along with the Sultan's son, who is a storyteller. And I just found this book really enjoyable. I really liked all the characters. I thought the world building was so interesting. I thought the plot reveals were really good. My only criticisms of the book is that the middle really dragged. I thought the first like 30% was really, really good. And I thought the last like 35% was really good. And the ending I just loved. I really want the second book right away. But the middle, I did not really care about much going on in the middle at all. I'm sure that's just like debut author stuff. I've heard a couple other people say the same thing. So I'm hoping that, the next book has a bit of a tighter pacing. But, yeah, I think this is a really good book. I think it's refreshing that it's based in like a different area of the world, kind of more on Middle Eastern mythology and such, and I have a really good time with this. I think you should check it out. I gave the Stardust Thief an 8.5 out of 10. All right, we're reaching those real good books of the month. Those books that I was like, yeah, I'm pumped to be reading these books. And so the next book I have on this list is The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second of the standalones in the First Law universe, and I loved The Heroes. I mean, I knew that I would. I absolutely expected to adore this book. It has everything that I like. It has a lot of battles. It has great characters. It has witty dialogue. It has returning characters from the original trilogy that I loved. And the themes of this book are really good. I think that's why it really went above Best Served Cold for me, because Best Served Cold is like a revenge story. And that's really it. It's fun, but it is just a person who wants to kill a bunch of other people because they were wronged in the past. And this book has so many great commentaries on war. For a little bit there, the battles actually did kind of exhaust me, which I thought was interesting because I usually like battle scenes, but there was just like, I don't know, it was... Joe Abercrombie does have a tendency to get a little like blow by blow when he's doing full battles. I think he really excels at duels. Every duel scene I've ever seen from him is just like electrifyingly interesting, but like battle scenes get kind of blow by blow, except for the chapter Casualties, which is like one of my favorite chapters he's ever written. But I thought I would maybe dip this down to like a 3.5 or a 4-star read near like, you know, the late middle, and then the last 100 pages were just phenomenal, and I just enjoyed it so much. I did end up giving this a 9 out of 10 just because I had a few minor issues. One of the POVs, Corporal Tunney, I didn't feel like added much to the book, and he probably had like, you know, like 50 or 60 pages total throughout the book, and I just felt like if he had been cut or just regulated to a non-POV character, that the book would have been a little bit tighter. I don't think he really added much, but that's just my opinion. And then also I felt like there was a character from the original trilogy that was around, and they weren't given really any scenes, and it felt so deliberate, and I just didn't agree with it because we got scenes with every other like military leader in this book, and they all got a lot of scenes. But because this character was like kind of a supporting main character in the original trilogy, it just felt like Joe was like, oh, we can't get more of him right now, and I just didn't agree. I was like, listen, you could have 3 or 4 scenes with this guy, and it's not gonna, you know, ruin the book as like you're cashing in on an old character or something. So I don't know. I just really wish we had seen more of that character. So that's why I only got a 9 out of 10. But I absolutely love The Heroes. I'm a little scared for Red Country because I don't like westerns. But Joe Abercrombie, I just trust now. So I'm sure I'm gonna at least like Red Country. Okay, so now we are up to the final 2. These are both kind of my books of the month, in that I mean, one book I read most of this book in April, and so I finished it in May, and it would be my book of the month, but I only read like, you know, 100 pages of it in May, so I don't really think that's how it should work. I feel like it's kind of the book of the month for April, but it doesn't really matter. The whole point is, the next book is Speaking Bones by Ken Liu. I have not been able to shut up about this series. We all know how much I love Ken Liu's writing, and I thought he stuck the landing with this one. Speaking Bones is 800 pages of bad things happening. It's actually funny. Today, right before filming this video, someone, Tanner, if you're watching this, messaged me, and he was like, oh my god, does anything good ever happen in this book? And that is the exact same spot where I messaged Bookborn and was like, does anything good ever happen in this book? It's just like a very exhausting moment in the book. But yeah, you know, this book is going to make you feel all sorts of things. You're going to run the absolute gambit. But I do feel like by the end, everything is worth it. I thought he absolutely stuck the landing. It was worth all of the detours and all of the pain and all the things you have to go through, all the anger to get to the ending, which I just thought was a beautiful ending. The ending made me cry, and I'm actually really excited to go back and reread the whole series at some point. Not soon, because I'm a little burnt out on big books. But yeah, I just, you know, I can't say much more about how much I love this book. I am going to be doing a full Dandelion Dynasty Why You Should Read, or like a series wrap-up. I'm going to be doing that soon. I'm also going to be talking with Ken once again with Bookborn. This time it will be a spoiler discussion of the whole series, so I'm so excited for that. That's going to come out around the time that Speaking Bones comes out, which is June 21st, is when the book comes out. I gave Speaking Bones a 9.5 out of 10, and the only reason I docked that 0.5 is just because the pacing in this book is not perfect. I mean, there's literally a an admiral that shows up for the first time ever. There's 7 pages of backstory on this admiral, and then they do something for 1 page, and then they're never mentioned again. And I was like, Ken, we could have cut this. This was not necessary, but, you know, apart from little things like that, I don't have any complaints. This is a wonderful series. I think people should give it a try. And finally, we have what I consider my book of the month in May. I actually binged almost the whole second half of this book on the last day of the month. I was just absolutely enamored, and it is now maybe my favorite sci-fi novel of all time, and it is Howling Dark by Christopher Rocchio. I really liked Empire of Silence. I thought it was a really good book. It had a lot of promise. I thought Rocchio's prose was incredible. I thought the character of Hadrian was so good. The world that he'd made was really good. But it did suffer from pacing issues. I felt like it was a lot of just like kind of going places, and there was like different aspects of the plot that never really felt like a cohesive whole. And so that only got 4 stars for me. But everyone told me the series continued to get better and that Howling Dark was insane. And for the first half of this book, I didn't understand where they were coming from. The first half is good, don't get me wrong. It might even be great. It just wasn't doing anything insane that I was like, why do people talk about how amazing this book is? It is slightly better than Empire of Silence. Like, the main thing that I would say about the first half of Howling Dark is that it has much better pacing than Empire of Silence. You can feel that it is plotted tighter. You can feel that the dialogue is better. You can feel that it is the evolution of a writer, but there was nothing crazy happening. And then the second half. The second half of this book slaps. You heard it here, folks. This book, incredible. There's a certain turning point in like the halfway mark that was really good. And then the last, like, I don't know, like 100 pages of this book are just insane. Like, I just couldn't believe the things that were happening. I had to like go back in the audiobook because I was listening to this book while I was like driving and stuff on the day, and then I came home and I just finished reading it, and I was like, is that really what happened? That can't be what's going on. And it was just like insane stuff all the time. And you know, it just really won me over by the end. This book is so crazy. I just wasn't what I was expecting at all. And I'm so excited to continue on with Sunnier. Like, I'm not going to get to Demon in White this month, but I really want to continue in July. This could become my favorite sci-fi series of all time, easily. It might even be already with just 2 books. I don't really know. I'd have to think about it. But yeah, I'm just absolutely astounded. If you read Empire of Silence and you thought it was good, or even just okay, I really urge you to give Howling Dark a try. Give it the second book, because this book really ups the ante in a large way. Alright everybody, that was my wrap-up this month. A lot of books again, as usual. I always try to keep what I'm saying about each book short, because I don't want this video to be like 5 hours. But then, you know, each book you gotta kind of talk about things, and hopefully I kept it brief enough that you aren't overwhelmed with how many things I'm talking about, but long enough that you felt like you got a sense of what I did and didn't like about each book. It's something that I'm working on. I want to try and be more concise with how I talk, but it is what it is. I'm long-winded. I'm going to always be long-winded. But let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books and what you thought about them, or what you read in May. I really want to know what you've been reading, or if any of these books are on your TBR, and which ones you're most excited about if they are. Thank you all so much for watching again. I really appreciate it. Please hit that like and subscribe button if you like the videos, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.